Hello and welcome to another tutorial. This is part 3 of our crate texturing tutorial, and in this tutorial we're going to be looking at adding some really cool hand painted details to really make this segment of our material pop. Now the first step is to add 2 new layers. We did this in the previous tutorial for our shadow layers, and we're going to be doing that this time, except this time I'm going to be calling it detail shadow, and the highlight I'm going to be calling detail light. And this is going to be the 2 layers that I use to add detail. Now, where are we going to be adding this detail? I hear you all scream in anticipation. If you have a look at where we've joined these materials together, we can see that we've got some lines here where the texture doesn't kind of meet. It doesn't tile across there. Instead, we can see a big thick line. It kind of looks really ugly, and we're just going to bring this out. We're going to kind of make this look a little bit more purposeful and a little bit kind of more man-made as opposed to it just being a mess. Now the tool we're going to be using is brush. In the previous tutorial we were using clone stamps, so make sure we switch back to brush, and I'm going to need to change a few settings. Most notably the hardness. So I want my hardness to be about 50%. I also want the brush size to be about 3 pixels. And once we've got this, we can start painting. Now I'm going to zoom in nice and close here so you can kind of see what we are attempting to achieve. Now this, in fact, actually I'm going to change this to 2 pixels instead of 3. 2 looks a bit big. Now I'm going to start here by just drawing a line down here and then drawing another line into the center. It's important that we do these 2 lines separately because we really want to create this kind of gap. So let's start. I'm going to be pressing really lightly. So I start at the top here, pressing really lightly. I'm not pressing hard at all. I'm also taking my time with the strokes. I'm not really kind of going out of my way to do this quickly. I really want to kind of take my time with this, like so. And we're going to do this on every corner. So it's over here. Same deal. I'm just going to follow where the crease is, where the seam is, where kind of like where the 2 materials don't meet. I'm going to kind of follow that line, and then I'm going to do another line into the center, like so. Maybe just shade a corner there or 2. Just really lightly, kind of just add a little bit of shadow there. And then I'm going to do this in the bottom corners. This time I find it a bit easier here to start in the middle. And I'm just going to kind of paint down now to the bottom of this. Now the reason why we're doing this before we duplicate is because if we can make sure all of these lines are in the same place on every duplicate, they will meet up nice and neatly on the material. And it's much easier for us to do this right once than it is to do this right, 6 times. So that's why we're going to do it just once, and then we'll replicate these and it will look awesome. So let's just finish off this side here. I want to make it clear we're not really painting shadows here. What we're doing is we're painting depth. We're painting the kind of like the detail in this wood, where the wood doesn't kind of split. So where these 2 kind of come together, there's an emission of light here, and we're kind of making that look like rather more purposeful than it is. So now let's switch to the detail light layer, and let's look at what happens when we add some light. Now light for me is coming in this direction. Okay. So this means that it's going to bypass this edge and it's going to hit this right edge here. Okay, if you can imagine, if we have a flat surface with a divot in it here, so this represents our crate here, and if my light's coming in from this angle, it's going to hit this and it's going to bounce off over here, so the player isn't necessarily going to see it immediately. There might be a thin highlight here, but what is more likely to happen is the light's going to hit this edge and it's going to bounce back. So that's why we're painting this edge with a highlight as opposed to the opposite edge. This obviously would change depending on where the light was coming from. So if the light was coming from this side, this would be flipped. So this would be backwards and forwards, and this one wouldn't be. This would just kind of bounce off into nowhere. So just bear that in mind as we're painting these highlights. And I'm going to do this on every single one of these. I'm going to kind of paint very lightly. I'm not pressing particularly hard at all. I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to do the same in the bottom. Nice and lightly again. And I'm going to do the same here. Now this time I'm going to be on the inside because we want to imagine the light's coming in from the top. So just trust me. I know it doesn't look right, but I promise it will be fine. And if we zoom out, we can kind of see the effect that that has. Okay, so this is pretty much it in terms of making those gaps kind of pop from a 3D point of view. The next step is to add a little specular highlight just on here, just to sharpen up this edge. Okay, and this is going to capitalize on these kind of highlights here. Now I'm going to rotate my canvas again. For those of you who've forgotten how to do that, we press R and hold R, and we just rotate this round until we get it to snap into place. Take your time with this, because the longer you spend, the kind of the more impressive the result will be. And I'm going to go through the same process. I'm going to add a very thin highlight here. You probably won't even see a massive amount of difference, but it makes a huge difference when we zoom out. So I'm going to do the same over here. This highlight's a little bit harder to pick. I'm going to kind of go in here somewhere. I think this will work pretty well. And we'll kind of zoom out here, and we'll just come into here, and we'll reset that view. And I'm just going to reduce the opacity of the detail light and the detail shadow to about 70%, similar to what we were doing before. In fact, actually, maybe not that much. It might be kind of as close to 90%, something like that. 82 for me is fine. So, what's next? We have to duplicate this. So we've added in some detail, and now we need to duplicate this. And we have a whole host of layers that we need to duplicate. Now, because we want to work in as a destruction-free environment as possible, we are not going to just merge all of these and kind of position them. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to select all of these layers and duplicate them and then merge them. This just means that we don't have to worry about preserving the previous layers. They'll be preserved for us. The only layer that we don't want is this central slat section. So let's find out which layer that is. Central slat. Which one is it? That's the central slat. That's the wood slat center. That's the copy one. That's the copy two. So I'm just going to merge these together, and I'm going to call those just wood slat center. I'm not going to worry too much about naming those. But what we do want is we do want to hold control and select all of the other things here, and I just want to duplicate them, and I want to right click and I want to merge layers. Now, before I go anywhere, the first thing I want to do is I just want to, with this layer selected, select the marquee tool. I just want to delete anything I've got over here. Okay, that's just going to stop any kind of overlaying of detail. And I should now just have this and my pesky arrow that I drew for you all, which I can also delete. And I should now have this, and what I can do is I can hold shift and I can actually drag this into position down below. Now I'm going to flip these horizontally, but before I do this, we just want to make sure that we don't have anything else copying here. So I'm just going to select everything over here and make sure I've deleted it, select everything down here, make sure I've deleted it and select everything over here, make sure I've deleted it, and let's try Control T again and see if it so it doesn't. So the easiest way of getting rid of this problem is to just select the marquee, select the crate itself, select move tool, and then just kind of nudge, and we can then press Control T, and that kind of sorts us out. So we want to flip this vertically. Okay, this isn't going to change where the highlights and shadows are, but it is going to kind of create that similar thing that we were trying to create earlier. Okay, we're going to come in and add an edge in here later on, so don't panic. But what we are going to do now is we're just going to duplicate these to the other areas. So I'm going to hold Alt and I'm going to drag this. Okay, same dealio again. I'm going to press Control T. Before I do that, I'm going to select it and press Control T. And we're going to flip this horizontally in the same way we did previously. So that's going to create our edge there. We're also going to duplicate this again to where it needs to go here. And although I haven't duplicated this, I am happy to keep that as it is. I'm not going to flip it. I'm quite happy to keep that where it is. But what I am going to do is I'm just going to reduce the opacity of this so that I can position it perfectly. It looks pretty good already, to be honest, but I just want to make sure that I'm getting it as close to perfect as possible. That looks absolutely fine there. I just return the opacity slider to 100. So it's really important as you're doing this to make sure that you've got decent kind of idea of where these details are in relation to where the edges are on the UV. If they're off, they're going to look really off, and we want to try and avoid that where possible. So next I'm going to duplicate this and put it over here. We're not going to have to flip this. This is already kind of symmetried like so. And again, I'm happy to kind of leave that as it is. And finally, I'm just going to duplicate this and move it down below. This time I'm going to flip this one so that it kind of fits and looks nice. So I'm going to select it again and then press Control T, otherwise I'm going to end up with all the other rubbish. So I'm going to select it, press Control T, and then I'm going to rotate a tool. I'm going to right click on it, and this time I'm going to flip vertically, and I'm just going to kind of plug this in place like so. And what I am going to do, actually I wonder if this has been, just flip it again, because this one might be all over the place. There we go, that's better. Okay, so that's what we should end up with once we're done. So now let's kind of use the same process that we were dealing with previously to kind of add these together. Now what I am going to do is before I add any detail tools, I'm going to select all the layers we've just created, and I'm going to merge them together. This essentially creates all but one of our. So these will kind of be those ones, and this one is our unique one. So if we need to go back down the stack, we can, but for the moment these ones are kind of happy as they are. And what I would like to do is I want to drag these beneath detail, light and shadow. Okay, so let's select light, let's select paintbrush, and now we can start kind of painting again. And all we're looking to do is just kind of bring out the edge here. Now I'm going to rotate the canvas by 90 degrees, same as previous. And just on this edge here and this edge here, I'm just going to add a very faint kind of white highlight. Nothing massive, I don't want to add a gouge or anything. What I do want to do is I just want to kind of make it look like there is a little edge there, if you get what I mean. I want it to look like that there's an edge as opposed to there being a... And I'm going to kind of follow this all the way down, all the way down here, all the way down to the bottom of that particular slat. I'm going to come all the way down. Okay, it's a very faint highlight, so we don't need to worry too much about tiling. We do want to make sure that we kind of try and get it as close as possible. We're just trying to paint a pretty straight line here. Now I'm not holding shift in painting, because if I did that I would end up with a straight line, but it wouldn't look, it would kind of look too it would look too man-made. It wouldn't look kind of rough enough. Kind of just adding some of these highlights in here. I'm not following the very edge, you'll notice, and this just gives me a little bit of room for error. I'm just going to kind of increase this, move this up, and I'm just going to paint this all the way to the edge, like so. And where we've got things like this, I'm just going to kind of paint a little bridge there, so it kind of looks like it goes in, doesn't go over. And I promise you this will look absolutely cool. This will look awesome when it's kind of in play. Okay, and the last little thing we need to do is do the same here. So I'm just going to add a little highlight here. This is going to create a highlight on the edge of the model, so it kind of makes it look a little bit. I'm going to go through the same process we did previously. And this is going to look really weird in 2D, but I promise when we add this to the 3D model, it's not going to look terrible at all. You will kind of see that it will highlight those edges, and it will just make them look a little bit more pronounced, and it will be purposeful. It's not going to kind of be doing it by accident. We're actually adding this in for that very purpose. We want that edge to look really nice and highlighted. We want it to look like there's a nice edge there, and it doesn't matter if it's not absolutely perfect. Sometimes that randomness can really look cool in 3D. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of, that's it. So let's zoom around. I'm going to reset my view. And that's what I kind of end up with. So you kind of see that we've created what looks like a bend there, and that's fine. We could also, as well, if we wanted to, just add the same thing in between each of the blocks here, like so. And you'll begin to see the effect that that can have. We do the same over here. Just add a nice highlight there. Okay, and we also want to go down these highlights and we want to add them to the corners or the edges of our top and bottom faces. It doesn't have to be particularly accurate, they just have to be there just ever so slightly. You notice that they're kind of tough to see, and they're designed to be. They're just kind of meant to emerge, that the more the player looks at the object, the more detail they kind of see as their eyes kind of settle. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're just trying to kind of create that very effect. Okay, fine. And the last thing I'm going to do is just do the same thing here. I'm not going to do this on both sides. I'm going to do this on one side, just because what I don't want is for there to be any kind of clashes. Now that's fine. I'm happy with that. So let's have a look at creating some kind of real cool damage using exactly the same techniques that we've used already. I'm going to use two new layers. I could use the same layers as damage, but we've already changed the opacity here, and I'm going to call these damage DMG shadow, and I'm going to call them DMG light. And we're going to start with shadow. Now I'm going to kind of demonstrate this process just using these slats in the middle. So these slats in the middle look kind of a little bit lackluster. We want to bring those forward, and we can do this just by using the kind of like the black shadow brush, just to very lightly just add in some detail here. So where we've got this one here, we want to add a little bit of detail here, and we also want to do the same over here, and this is just going to look really awesome when it's done. I'm pressing very lightly. Okay, so once I've added those shadows in, I'm going to grab my highlight layer, I'm going to switch to white, and now I'm going to just add in those highlights and just watch how this transforms the entire kind of back piece of this. Where we've got any details like this, just skip them with the highlight just for now. We're going to really capitalize on those in a minute. You'll be pleased to know I'm not going to add damage to every single one of these. I'm going to add damage to one, and then I'll let you kind of work, and then in the next video we'll kind of we'll catch up and see where we've gone. Now I've added highlights to one side. What I am going to do on the other side is just add a very faint highlight, and it needs to be fainter than on the right hand side. So I'm really carefully just adding in just ever so slightly a highlight on the left hand side. And this is just going to create this double effect. It looks like the planks are kind of 3D on both sides. Capitalize on that detail there. Kind of add this in, and I'm going to zoom back and really watch how you see a massive difference between what we've created here and what exists here. Okay, so in a second I'll let you go and do that to all of them. It's really important that we do them separately, actually, because on some you might make a few mistakes that you don't make on others, and it really makes for an awesome kind of texture. And although in industry you might find that we do all of this to one crate and then kind of like copy and paste it around, it's really good practice to kind of like do these sorts of things. So now let's add detail. Now we're kind of blessed with this material because there are loads of different kind of highlights and shadow details already included, and we can capitalize on that. So I'm going to pick this one here. This is a really good example, as is this one, and we can also use this as an example. Now I always paint shadows first, and I'm just going to pick a few details to kind of really pinpoint. First one's this, and I'm really going to kind of create a bridge between this detail and the gouge in there. Can you kind of see how I'm just sort of filling in that area? I'm also going to do the same to this slit here. This is the one that we kind of avoided earlier, and this one here I'm just going to kind of bring out. I'm just going to kind of shade a little bit, just make sure it kind of fits in what we're doing here. Now when we get to the bottom here, I'm just going to kind of almost kind of do like a reverse highlight. So I'm going to paint some shadows just underneath, make it look like it's casting a shadow there. I'm going to switch to my light layer, I'm going to flick to highlights, and now I'm just going to kind of add some very very basic, just highlights here. And they really do make all the difference in the world, these, because they... So we're going to add that in. If I zoom back, you can see a huge difference between this one here and this one. You can really see that it looks like it's popping. Same here. Watch what happens when we add this to this. This is going to be really cool when we add this one in. I'm going to add this little highlight here and just kind of curve around there. I'm also going to add a little highlight in here. And as I zoom out, you can really tell that there's a level detail between this and this. Now, I know what you're thinking. What happens if we wanted to add our own little details? So, if I give you an example, I'd really like to use this opportunity to sharpen up this edge here. Because they kind of look a bit soft. I really want that edge to look purposeful. This one looks rounded. I want this to look almost like a right angle. And I can do that literally just by following that edge with my highlight brush, like so. Okay, all the way down. I can do the same over here. I can also do the same at the top. I am going to kind of just rotate around at this point. I'm not going to worry too much about pressing R. I'm also going to do the same at the top here. Kind of add in that highlight. What I'm trying to do is pick a point and kind of go there. As I zoom back, you can really see that sharpens up kind of the highlight. So what happens if I want to add my own detail? I've kind of used this as an example to kind of gouge in details that are already there and make those kind of look a little bit more detailed. What happens if I want to kind of break this apart? Well, there are two ways of doing this. Firstly, and this is always the step, I need to make sure I've got my shadow layer selected. I've got to make sure I've got my black selected, and I'm just going to, what I like to kind of put in place, the kind of like the guideline. This is the initial split. Now, it's important to note that wood, for the most part, tends to splinter. So if we see here, we've got some splits here, but it tends to do things like this, where because there are fibers, the top layer might split away, for instance, and that tends to not happen very cleanly. So we might find, for instance, that if we had a cut across here, that this would almost be a straight line, but not quite. So you might find we have a little curve just towards the end, and then I kind of add a little straight section there. So my guideline is really kind of basic, really thin, and then I go over it a few times just to really darken it up. Okay. And there are two ways of doing this. So I'm going to do another one just down here to show you the difference. So this one I'm going to keep flat as it is. The next one I'm going to do something slightly different with. So I'm going to try and keep the shape almost the same. And we'll just kind of sketch this in really quickly. Just kind of go backwards and forwards, making sure that I've got a dark line. Now the difference is with this one I'm going to keep it as it is. I'm not going to worry too much about adding any shading. But with this one I'm just going to darken this area here. I'm pressing very light. I'm just adding in a little bit of shadow here, like so. You can kind of see that shadow. Okay. Now I'm going to switch to my highlight, and I'm going to show you the difference between the two. So this one here, I'm going to catch my highlight the other side, because that's where the light's going to hit. And if I zoom back, you can really see the effect that has. Makes it look 3D. This time I'm not going to follow the black line. I'm going to follow the kind of the lighter of the two lines. So I'm just going to put in my corner here, and I'm going to follow this down here, and I'm just going to follow that line up and follow this line in. And I'm going to zoom out and show you what the difference is. You can kind of see that this one looks like it's flat, and this one looks like it's got some perspective almost. So this looks like this is kind of splintered away. We can make this look a little bit more realistic as well with the kind of like the damaged shadow layer. I'm going to change to 1 pixel brush now, because it's really important we get a really nice fine piece of damage. And what I'm going to do is, we can see where these grains are. I'm just going to kind of split them. Same thing here. I'm going to go over the top. Nothing special. I'm just kind of following the grains here. And this is one there. And you might find as well, at this point, we might just want to get rid of the highlight that we put there previously. Sorry, not the shadow layer. We want to get rid of the kind of like the damaged light layer here, so that we can add in a highlight that fits, and we don't have to worry too much about this. So let's go to the light layer. Let's switch to my light, and let's see what happens when we kind of bring these highlights down. You'll really see a difference here when we're done. And all I'm doing is kind of just following that pixel detail. You see, some of this stuff I haven't even put in. I'm just going to kind of capitalize on some of it there. Okay, and if I zoom out here, in fact before I do, I'm going to follow these in, kind of these little details here, make the top look like the wood. And if I zoom out here, you can really see now that this now looks like we've got some real detail here. We've got some real kind of splits. This almost looks like a plank in itself. Now that's pretty much it for the damage. I'm going to let you go as crazy as you like, kind of adding these in. But before I kind of end this video, I just want to very quickly show you how we can add in these metal kind of nuts that we clone stamped away. Now this, as always, is going to require 2 new layers. Okay, and I'm going to call this color nut. And at the top here, I'm going to call this one lighting nut. And I'm actually going to put all of the lighting for this metal object in the same place. This is just for speed. Normally I would separate them out. But the first step is in color nut to create a color that kind of fits. We want something that's perhaps a little bit bluer than just basic grey. Something like that looks fine. And we want to create a brush that's maybe 5 pixels, and we want a hard brush here. The reason it's important we have a hard brush is because when we press here, we want to make sure that we kind of are creating a nut shape, as opposed to something that is kind of really kind of opaque and soft. Now I'm going to increase my opacity to maybe 90% here. It's really important that we can see this nice and early on. So I'm going to position 1, and then we can maybe duplicate this around a little bit. So I'm just going to position 1, something like this. I'm just going to kind of add in some detail here. Okay, so you can kind of see here I've got some detail. And I'm going to just zoom in so you can really see this, because this is really subtle. I'm now going to switch to my black and white canvas. I'm going to go back to my 1 pixel soft brush. This is really subtle, so we really have to focus on what we're doing here. Now we know the light's coming from here. I'm going to paint the light first. In fact, this time I'm not going to have a 1 pixel brush. I'm going to see if I can have maybe a 3 pixel brush, something like that. And we're going to, there are 2 ways that we can kind of shade this. If I show you the fastest way, the fastest way to add the highlights to this is to create a brush that's roughly the same size as this, and just with a lower opacity, something again maybe 25%, just to kind of try and add a little dot there. Okay, kind of see what effect that has. We can then switch to dark. I'm going to just reduce the size of my brush, and we can add a little low light just around the base here. And if I zoom back, you can kind of see the effect that has. So let me show you again, this time perhaps with a slightly darker grey, because I think that grey was maybe a bit light. Something over here, that looks fine actually. I'll also make it a little bit bigger as well, because I think it's important that we see what's going on here. So I'm going to create another one down here, perhaps a little bit bigger this time. I'm just going to make sure my opacity is 100%. I'm just going to dot that in there so you can really see that. Now this time I'm going to add a different type of highlight. This time it's going to look flat. Now you'll notice my brush settings changed. I've got a 1 pixel brush, 100% hardness, and I'm going to grab my black and white layer. I'm going to grab my highlight layer first, on my highlight color, and I'm just going to nick the top of this, and then I'm going to grab the darkness, and then I'm going to do the same but the other side, and you can really see the difference that has. So this one here is soft, and this one here is kind of a bit harsher. We can also, as well, with this darkness selected, really kind of create almost like a hole that it sits in, and add in some opacity here, kind of add in some highlights that maybe that light or that hole is kind of receiving. And you can really see that kind of pops this, and we can do the same with this one here, add in kind of some shadows around it like so, switch to white, and this time we can then just add the shadow on the bottom side, and you can really see the difference that makes to the 2 of these. Now I don't mind which one of these that you choose. This one's kind of a softer nail, perhaps a bit more stylized. This one's maybe a bit more realistic. I'm going to leave it up to you which one you do. But in any case, that's the end of this particular video. What you need to do now is go through the techniques that we've gone through and just kind of have a play, create some really awesome effects yourself, and I will see you in the next video where we actually look at saving this out, applying it in Maya and making it look awesome. I hope this has been useful. I hope you've had some fun. I really hope that you've learned something. Any comments or questions, just let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll see you again soon.